Welcome to Theorycraft, a live podcast where game developers and their players gather in conversation. Jesus, it's been like 3 weeks. Okay, now back to the question. Candace and I were catching up. We are waiting for Chris. It's great to see everybody again. Any news from your world, Candace?
I have lots of weird news. My company that I'm working for said that we don't have to come into the office for a couple of months. Like, they told us that we needed to return to office, and they're like, we're going to pause it for a little while. Like, COVID's going crazy and stuff like that. And I was like, all right, fuck it. I'm going to Texas.
Oh,
which is like,
shit.
It's a precarious time politically to go to Texas, but I have lots of family in Texas and I have friends in Texas. And I've daydreamed like the idea of moving back to Texas. Even back whenever I was working at Blizzard, I was like, okay, if I get another job in the game industry, like Austin is probably where I want to be, right? Like it's like, one, it's Texas and that's where my family is. And two, it has lots of game dev. Three, it's like, it is the most California of Texas, and I'm very used to California. So anyways, so I took the opportunity. I was like, fuck it. And I kind of overcommitted. So I don't like LA at all. I've decided the only place I don't want to live is LA. And so I didn't just like get on a flight and go to Texas. I put all my shit into storage and I moved out of my apartment so that if I have to come back to California, the easy thing to do is not to move back to my apartment in LA, which, by the way, I was talking about this, the rent went up like crazy. So
Yeah, no, I think you're probably done with that place. Just a casual cross-country move. That's a lot of provisioning. You're obviously aware of how fortunate you are to be able to juggle something like this, and I hope it goes great. It would be a pain in the butt to have to bounce back. Nice to shake things up, especially after COVID. You never know what you'll learn from it, you know?
yeah, I love Austin. Like there's this sign. I was going to get lunch today. There's this sign that says, "Keep it juicy, juicy. Come eat that lunch." And I was like, I made it, fam. I'm home.
Yeah, that was the alternate title for this episode, but we decided to go with AAA gaming instead.
Come eat that lunch.
Yeah, keeping that juicy like we do. Well, that's cool. And you're right close. You can join a streaming house. No problem. You got KJ nearby. Have you two met up yet?
Is Asmongold here too?
He is. Yeah, the whole OTK. Well, I think a lot of them are there. That's like the streamer city. Like LA is where all the TikTokers go.
I wonder if Asmon would even like answer. If I would be like, "Hey, Asmon, I worked on WoW. I'm in Austin for a couple months. Would you want to like grab lunch?" He'd probably be like, "Fuck off." But I wonder. I'm super curious.
Yeah, I mean, you got Chris. You know, if you're like honestly serious about making that intro, I'm sure he could liaise. There you go. They have shared a stage. Well, that's cool. So you haven't met up with Kevin yet, though?
No, I just got in on Sunday, and so I'm doing my first week of work here. Still acclimating in the heat and all. What about you? How's life for you?
What about me? I went back to work. Diligent listeners will recall that I took like a month off in June, which was, oh my God, it was so fucking good. There were only a couple spots where it was like I had to push through boredom and find out what was on the other side. I worked on a lot of personal projects, went to the gym a bunch. I started taking stand-up comedy classes, which has been fun. I have to do a set in a couple of weeks that I'm getting nervous about. Yeah, just opened the life up a little bit. And I honestly really didn't miss work that much. I missed the people. But now having gone back, I'm on 2 different projects. I'm working on Don't Starve, which is like our golden goose. Welcome, Chris. And Rotwood, which we announced recently, which is kind of like a brawler. And I'm having so much fucking fun. I am super into this game, Rotwood, that we're making. And I was thinking of how rare it is that I actually get to work on a game that I really just want to be playing all the time. You know, I've been working in games for, I guess, like 10-ish years, and I feel like it's maybe 1 in 5 projects I'll be on that I actually am like, I want to keep playing it after I'm done. And this has been one of those so far. So, yeah, it's really helped me glue in and make like all sorts of game design suggestions. Like, I just feel like I have a better sense for what's going to feel good because I'm also obsessed with playing it, so I can feel when those like really sticky moments are, you know? You don't have to love the games that you work on, as I'm sure you both know. I think it definitely does help. And it's nice to feel that because my previous 2 years in COVID were just like very meandering. So anyways, I'm back. Your boy makes games once again. That's
Welcome
pretty much
back.
it. Yeah,
Isn't
thanks.
that also why you kind of like chose this? So Luca chose this topic. Can you give us a little bit more explanation behind that? Sort of.
Yeah, the state of AAA gaming. There was this conversation that I got pretty drawn into yesterday in the Discord There was a tweet about how, gamers had done this to themselves with regards to like innovation in the AAA space. And then I had watched that Bellular video that just felt like it was really picking on some AAA devs, not innovating, some kind of limp feeling releases and announcements like the Gollum game and Skull and Bones. And it was just like, there is a moment going on here where people are feeling this kind of midsummer lull and dissatisfaction with like the big boys. And it seems like an apt time to talk about it. So anyways, Chris, welcome to the show.
Yo, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Do I sound okay? Okay.
You sound great.
All right, great. No, sorry. I got home late. I mean, I left the office a half an hour ago, but there was a shit ton of traffic because there was an accident. There's always an accident on the 55. Candace knows what I mean by that. So I'm here. But I think this is a good topic just because I think there's a lull in games right now. And I think it's always around this time of the year, but I think especially this year, there's a big lull. There's like, people are just kind of emo because there's nothing really to play, nothing new. And then there was these series of tweets that were going viral about, what was it? There was like 22 games made by Rockstar between some period of time. And then in the same period of time recently, there's like one or something like that.
Yeah.
And kind of the reason why is because, Rockstar specifically, it's like they have been working on, GTA Online, which has been a huge success. And GTA 5 continues to sell boxes. It's like been on like the top 10 list of sales for like since it came out or something like that. It's kind of a phenomenon, I think, with a lot of younger players.
Yeah, it had like a mid-COVID renaissance too with the RP. Like it really came bounding back one of those months. I remember out of nowhere, like last summer sometime, I think.
Yeah, so they're kind of a special case. They've just kind of been serving that player base, and if there's a market for that, and they're just players who want to play your game and play GTA Online, just keep making content. I think that makes sense, but I do think there is going to be a reckoning about these larger, several $100 million projects that have become kind of the norm. The challenges of building those are massive. And I think we've seen a huge dispersal of the past like couple of years of people just moving around different studios. And you don't have like that. Anytime you're going to lose talent and shift things, it's going to become harder to build a game like that because it's very contingent on having that talent remain around because it's a lot of tribal knowledge and all that sort of thing. So I don't know. I think the AAA behemoths are going to become less of a thing in the future, become harder to make. And also, I just think players' taste, if you look at a lot of the games that have been viral that a lot of people have been enjoying the past couple of years have been smaller indie games, whether it's Valheim or V Rising, or recently that Raft game has been popping off, so I don't know. So yeah. I do agree with you, like that take by Bellular is kind of cringe, and there needs to be more of a balance.
That's all.
Kind of, yeah. There needs to be a more balanced take about like why this is, and is this? Are they just? And ultimately, they're just kind of serving a market, right? If the market wants really high fidelity, holy shit, you could see every pore on Kratos's face type experiences. Well, they're going to make that for you, right? The market. The industry responds to the market, but I do think we're going to see a shift. And so I was kind of wondering, like this topic, who better to have more of a balanced, lucid take than us, right? So I don't know. That's kind of the idea about the topic,
I think that about every topic. Yeah.
Right. So actually, could we unpack? I didn't read the article that you're talking about, and I didn't see Bellular's video. If you could summarize it as generously as possible towards Bellular, knowing what he's talking about.
That'd be good for the audience,
I think he does, so...
Maybe Luca, you want to do the honors?
Sure. I started rewatching it. So anyways, about halfway through the video, I think they started talking about Niantic's layoffs, and I don't really remember if they tried to tie the layoffs to kind of like a misallocation of talent within Niantic or trying to make one of these high fidelity games. But anyways, the gist of the first half of the video, at least what I recall of it now, was there have been a bunch of announced AAA titles lately that, in Bellular's opinion, gamers just kind of don't want. He's sort of like, how are these limping across the finish line? Why are we getting a AAA big budget Gollum adventure? Why are we getting Skull and Bones? The UI looks like the Elden Ring UI meme, and sunk cost fallacy all over the place. And does AAA just kind of not sort of get it? Do they not sort of understand what like gamers' appetites are? I think was more or less where he was going. Yeah, he picked a couple of games that feel to me like probably they look like they're probably going to go down as B games in the AAA space, which are very uncommon now, but used to just happen all the time. And I don't think we're always sort of viewed as like a write-off or a failing to grasp. You know, they just happened. But that was it. He and Matt were just musing on that stuff. And I don't know. What I really took issue with the video is it just didn't feel like, I didn't get a sense that this idea that AAA just doesn't know what gamers want and is building them things they don't need was supported by, like, I just didn't really buy the support. It really just kind of felt like, let's point at these two examples and just sort of laugh for 20 minutes and make one-liners, you know? Like, it was reasonably entertaining to watch, but it felt a little mean-spirited, I think I said. So that was it.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, please feel free to amend or, like, elaborate on my take, because I don't remember anything anymore. But
I think that, those examples are pretty good. I didn't watch the video, so I don't. I'm neutral on his take, but I have a lot of interesting. Oh, sorry. This topic was really interesting as a thought experiment for me, because I've been in on the AAA treadmill for so long. Like what Chris was saying earlier about GTA and how they just want to keep making content. And so many games are just like in the keep making content mode, which is a very, very, very different production mode. Like you need completely different processes, you need completely different hiring, you need completely different team sizes, you need different milestones. Like there's so much structure that is involved in building a video game. And like, so there's two parts of the problem with that structure is like, one, that structure is tailor-made to make whatever big game you're making, right? If you're making Assassin's Creed, they've spent fucking 20 years figuring out how to make Assassin's Creed video games. They're not going to change all of that so they can make a different Assassin's Creed game. And then even if they did, go ahead.
No, sorry to interrupt. I'm recalling another thing that he like kept bringing up in his argument was, Ubisoft is obviously getting very good at making Ubisoft-style games, and they must have the tools and stuff for it. So when it's time for them to think of a new game, do they start from, well, what kind of Ubisoft game can we make and work backwards from there? And sort of like I guess what he was hinting at is, you're just, people aren't asking for Ubisoft games, so why would you start at sort of like, I can build a thing that's like, just mini-map icons all over the place and kind of just like, it also feels like, yeah, of course, if you have a pipeline, teams, experience, and engine that is optimized to make a certain type of game, like I don't find it unreasonable to start at what sort of game are we strong at making and not work backwards, but work in parallel with ideas you might really want to chase or things you want to explore. Like to not play to your strengths and try to reinvent yourself every time seems like fucking insane. They're not going to go like, let's throw out all of that and we really should be making a driving game or, like when we saw how that went with Frostbite, like you can absolutely misapply tools and cause huge, huge fucking problems. So I don't see anything wrong with that. But
I don't even think it's as intentional as that, although what you're saying is very true. Like that was, you teed me up perfectly for my second point, which was like, it's extremely cost prohibitive to suddenly change, either your engine or even like repurpose your engine, or that the part that's unintentional is like whenever you develop a culture that works to guide 400 to 1,200 people towards a goal, you've spent years creating that. There's been pain, there's been growth, there's been how do we structure our milestones? How do we communicate? How do we make redundancies between like, making sure that if so-and-so is supposed to make this visual art asset, there needs to be like accountability, there needs to be checks for it, there needs to be checklists, there needs to be like, there's a whole infrastructure that even if you were to change your tool, like and say, fuck it, we're going to try something new in Unreal, like Final Fantasy VII Remake was made in the Unreal Engine, for example. There's still like the culture that you have to dismantle and like the knowns for problem solving, which is actually what I wanted to like expand into, which is like you hit it the nail right on the head as to why innovation is really hard for video games that are either making sequels to something they already have, or they're making similar games to what they make because again they're playing to their strength. And you have to go in with a completely different mindset. You have to be willing to change the culture and the way that the team works. Because a game that's just focused on like delivery and content delivery, like a live game, it's a very different environment than an indie game or a game that is going to do something exploratory. And an example I'll give you is like prototype teams are usually like, if you're building a prototype for a game and you have these stakeholders that are breathing down your neck saying like, you need to there's two different ways of thinking about prototyping. There's like one, can we de-risk the idea? Like if you want to make Valheim meets Animal Crossing meets Stardew Valley or whatever that game is that just came out that's like all of those things, like, okay, de-risk it by showing us like what you're going to do to like innovate or like make it less scary because we know what the outcome is of a Valheim game and we want your game to be bigger than a Valheim game, or we want you to like at least prove that you can be as big as a Valheim game. So there's the people that de-risk, but there's also the people who think like, no, but what sets you apart? Like, where's your innovation? I think that AAA games don't have the infrastructure for the latter part. You can de-risk pretty easily in an existing org, an existing structure. You can just say like, okay, well, if we want to make something new, we can just like steal some people from the animation team and the art team, the design team, and the engineering team, and they'll use all the same tools and processes that we use, but they'll just be doing something in a corner. Like this is the age-old joke with World of Warcraft, which is like, did that cost us a raid tier? Because raid tier is what the players want. And then if people are being disrupted, then did you take it from people that are making a raid tier, right? But even those people again are like in the same process. They're in the same like shipping structure and tools pipeline and delivery management as the AAA game that's just cranking content out of knowns. Whereas like when you go into prototyping, you should be thinking about like, should we make this game and what are our basic core like principles of the game?
Yeah.
Like, where are we finding the fun? Yeah, Chris is probably super embedded in this.
Well, I think the question you're asking about like whether you should make it, I think is a lot of what people ask, right? It's kind of like that Jurassic Park quote about we were so focused on whether we could, we forgot about whether we should, or whatever, about the game ideas. And so I think a lot of people with Western AAA games are just like, who is this for? What is this game, right? And so I think other than Elden Ring recently, which was a massive success, and AAA, of course, but that's not even a Western game, right? So that's why the kind of topic about that Lord of the Rings game with Gollum or whatever is so tantalizing, because it's like such a good example of how the players feel like AAA is not meeting, like the product market fit for like a lot of the AAA games are just not hitting the mark. And like, why is that, right? Is it an issue about the right people aren't greenlighting the right games? Is it just cultures of that studio, just kind of, or those various studios, the decision makers there are like, stuck in the past or just do whatever they feel like what game they want to make and aren't really caring about the market? Is it just over analyzing what the market wants and not reading it correctly? Like, what is it?
It's really easy. It's really easy whenever you're trying to please a stakeholder, and it's cheaper to just give them the side in, right? To say like, this is World of Warcraft, but whatever. Or this is Super Mario Kart, but this one thing. So they can squint past everything else that you're presenting to them, and then you have that language that you can understand, and you have that like that baseline of understanding of what a game is. If you can say like, this thing already exists in the world, and then here's the thing we're going to change, and then you can prototype like that one little change without building the rest of the game. And that is really appealing because it's not as risky, right? It's all about risk mitigation. And so this is why I say like the teams have to be really small, because if you have a huge team, even if you have like a team of 40 people or 60 people, like that is a lot of people that need to stay busy and need to stay fed. And they might not even have like the same goal. If you're trying to prove out an inventory system or something like that, but then you hired an animator, it's like, well, what is that animator you're going to pay this person. Guess I got to make some work for them,
Yeah, that's the other thing. You get into the sunk cost fallacy where it's like, well, we have all these people on the team. We're making this thing. Just shut the fuck up. Just believe in it, right?
Yeah.
And then it just gets made. It's not, and then it's for nobody. Like, I think that is definitely a thing for sure. But I think that the real crux, I think, is just that the stakeholders, the ones who decide what games get greenlit and made at the larger AAA studios, I think they're all about like you talk about de-risking. They're just about de-risking the possibility that the game may not, recoup its costs, right? And so it's just they play it safe. Similar, like, and you see this just even in mainstream movies, right? Like, just it has to be a sequel because we know at least there's an addressable market for this movie because someone saw the first one and it made X money. So theoretically, someone will come see the sequel, right? And so you get the same kind of thing with like so many projects from AAA. Whereas, for example, if a savvy designer came to them and pitched them, say, PUBG or something like that, they'd be like, well, give me some examples of how this game has sold in the past. Like, well, there's nothing quite like it, but it's based on like Arma or something. It's like, okay, well, let's look up how much Arma made. Oh, that's not $1 billion property. Why would we do that? Meanwhile, PUBG is now $1 billion property, right? So how do you see the tea leaves and figure that out if you're at a AAA company?
Exactly. You hit the nail right on the head. Like, that's exactly what I was trying to say. And so you don't want to throw a bunch of money at something that's an unknown. So you want to have the security of saying there's an existing infrastructure for this. Either like the team is really good at making this kind of game and we'll make a different game that feels very different but has all the same like moving bits. Or you say this kind of game already exists and here's how we think we're going to steal their audience.
Man, I have a few directions to kind of go in now. I kind of want to make a callback, Chris, to way early in the history of this podcast. You wrote that Substack article on Valheim and how AAA companies were kind of missing the point and getting scooped by all these indies on new genres and experiences and stuff like that. And one funny aside, I just realized you said that like EA was the most hated gaming company in the world, and that I think that title has probably been supplanted, but. You were saying that a big problem is that they're just drowning in so much data that they end up trying to create kind of like mishmashes that seemed like they would like cater to a really, I guess, larger de-risked sort of audience. And so they can't just commit to like a really straight ahead vision and sort of see what's not there. Do you still feel like the data is really like one of the main sources of paralysis or one of the main reasons why? Do you think that they're just like actually trying to read the tea leaves too closely and getting lost?
I mean, I think the data is really important, but it should be used as a tool, something to help you, make your decision rather than it just being what drives the decision, right? At least that's what I think the best way to go. And so I do think that is a factor. I think sometimes they could use the data to shut down a creative idea, but I think the bigger thing is just ultimately the best people to greenlight whether a game in the trenches of the zeitgeist and can understand what's fun and what's not, what's kind of played out, what's the future, right? Mm-hmm. And for the past several years, the best ones to be able to like kind of get that have been the indies, I think. And then usually the AAAs are just like, oh shit, look at the data's changing. There's these indies that are popular now. Let's try to like make a game around that. And so it's really kind of the AAAs are just like wagging the tail on the indies. And they have the muscle to bring a game to a broader market through marketing or through really great art or through, superior netcode and stuff like that. But I think that's just kind of why you're just not seeing a lot of innovation in the indies, right? So ultimately, it's just you got to have good tastemakers and just trust them. I think at the studios, but it's like hard to really kind of sign off in that in a corporate environment or really a big professional company, unless it's just kind of, I don't know. I guess it just depends. But I think, certainly say at Blizzard, it's just the way they greenlight games. It's I think it is kind of more of a tastemaker, but then you also get the kind of situation where some of them churn out and don't really kind of know. They're in a position of power of making those decisions, but are they the best ones at this period of time?
Yeah. They get too entrenched or comfy or removed, whatever you want to say. I think, especially if you're making the same thing for a very long period of time, I think you need to check your tastemaker credentials.
It's a very hard problem. And, I kind of had faith, in the article I talk about how I think startups are actually a better path because they could be better at kind of analyzing whether a game could be successful or not. But what I've realized now after a year in this industry is just that it has its own challenges. One is that usually a lot of the startups, the teams that get funding are people who have already been from successful teams, so they have experience, working on League of Legends or WoW or some popular IP, right? Usually what happens is just that, well, okay, cool, we'll give you funding for this, but only if you make something that is in line with your experience, right? So if you worked on League of Legends, well, we're going to expect you to make a MOBA, right? Mm-hmm. And so you kind of get boxed into a certain type of game, right? Because you get typecast essentially. And you can understand why they do that, because it's just like, well, it secures their investment because they know you could do it, right? But in the end, you get less innovation there as well. That's a challenge with venture as a route. But so I think the AAA incubation teams have a lot of problems with this. I think venture does too. So what's like the other option? I guess, the smaller studios and indies, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's a fascinating issue.
and it's not even just about like a risk or like a whether you can read the tea leaves kind of thing. Like if you think about, correct me if I'm wrong, but like indie game takes, I mean, it could take anywhere from like 50 grand to 2 million to make their average indie game, right? If it's like one person just making a game and they crank it out into a mobile game in a year or something, it's like, sure, you could say that was $50,000. They didn't want to pay themselves very well. But then you're looking at a AAA game. If you're looking at like 2 million versus $80 million, like that's a huge bet to make. Whereas like it's much easier. You'll find a lot more people willing to make a $2 million bet than an $80 million bet, and on something risky, And it's I always read these articles that are like, why is indie so much better than AAA? Like, one, that's very BuzzFeedy. That's a very like putting words in your mouth kind of article. But two, a lot of what I hear is, well, because indies take their time. And I don't know if that's true. Like, I think that indies, I mean, I don't know if there's any like different time pressure. The people I've known that have worked indie work a lot. They work hard. They're still trying to, make deadlines just like people in AAA. I think though it's more of a question of like scope when you think about AAA versus indie, whereas like indie game is trying to make an experience that like everything that's centered, like the core of that experience is centered around like one thing or two things, like a simple premise, like you're a goose and you're causing some fucking trouble, or like you're a Viking and you're trying to live in, kind of survive in this world or something. Yeah. And they don't need 100 different like systems to feed into that.
Yep.
Or like Donut County is like, you have this hole and it gets bigger and you have to eat things until everything is gone on the screen. It's like a really simple premise, and the scope is really small. And so it's whenever you get into AAA where it's like, well, if you don't like the key of our game, if you don't like Horizon Zero Dawn, for example, like if you're not the kind of person who likes shooting tall striders, or I guess you don't actually fight those, but shooting like weak spots on enemies and hunting them down, well then we're gonna put in some other features for you. We're gonna put in like these mini games and collectibles and all this other stuff. And hopefully all of these systems will marry together and feel good as a cohesive picture. But indie games tend to like focus on one simple premise and then polish the hell out of that simple premise, instead of kind of like leaning on other features to be the fun part of the game.
We got Darkglaive up here. What's on your mind?
It's been a long time. It's been a while. It's been a hot minute.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think Candace kind of hits the nail on the head, honestly, with the whole thing with the indie games seeming to have a lot more focus. Like, they tend to hone in on a single idea and just run with it to, like, its logical conclusion as far as they can possibly take it, be that, like, a 3-hour game or, like, a 20-hour experience. And, like, that's something we've kind of noticed. And I've been rambling here and live chatting about how I kind of believe that indie gaming is, like, kind of undercut that B game space, where, like, that's where a lot of the out of left field ideas and successes tend to come from, like concepts you never really knew you wanted, like kind of hitting it, like basically just throwing some wild idea out into the ether, and then like either it sticks or it doesn't perform.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I feel like less B games is not just because indies are maybe filling in the gaps there, but just, fewer bets and surer ones, like B games were part of the kind of like buckshot approach of just like something probably needs to be on the shelves for every season back in the day. And so you'd grab whatever licenses you could. And that definitely seems to have evolved. I'm kind of curious. Somebody asked about it. I think maybe it was Chase pointing it out with Riot and chat, but it's not like AAA should be fundamentally unable to innovate, or with, their vast resources and money, they should be able to spin up, dozens of smaller teams and venture out into different concepts if like they really were focused on innovating as opposed to just landing one behemoth title. And so I was wondering who y'all think are some of like the more agile AAA developers out there or publishers.
Let's see here. If I were to answer that, I would say I'd say like in terms of the AAA space, I would say Sony and Nintendo tend to be a bit more buckshot than say like Microsoft in terms of their publishing. Sometimes they just throw stuff out there every now and again, and sometimes it pans out, sometimes it doesn't. I would argue that those are two of the more agile developers at the current moment in terms of publishing. Though I'd say believe it or not, Ubisoft sometimes throws out some pretty interesting stuff out there, and I'd say EA has been slowly getting there in some instances.
I know.
They put out things like I would say games like Get Out and It Takes Two certainly are not things you would have expected to be published by EA in the past. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I think that Ubisoft started kind of rounding the corner and was earning this reputation of like putting out smaller, more interesting titles and trying new stuff in the past several. I think around the time that was it Grow Home came out. Yeah, and what was the game?
That's a nice little game.
Yeah. Was that the one with the something child? I don't know. They started
Child of Light.
Child of Light. Yeah, it really seemed like they were willing to just kind of maybe I shouldn't even say like who seems like the most innovative. I just mean like what AAA studio seems like they have the largest appetite for risk and experimentation, and then I guess also maybe delivers on it. And man, I can't help but think that like if we had had this discussion 2 years ago, it would be completely different, because now every company I want to think of, I just feel like the alternative now, as Chris points out in his article, is like you just buy the studio that's doing the thing you want to do, you know? Like you don't start doing it yourself, you just acquire them. But Chris, Candace, you have any thoughts on, it's okay to say Riot, by the way.
Okay, and full disclosure, as always, I'm a Riot employee. I'm not speaking on behalf of Riot. I'm not a spokesperson for Riot. This is my personal opinion. But I came to Riot for almost that very reason. I think that Riot, it's funny when you go through your D-noob, like when you go through your like, welcome to Riot, here's like everything you need to know, like here's how you get your paychecks, and here's who we are as a company, and here's our values and stuff like that. Like you're already pretty familiar with their values by the time you join, because they talk about it during the interview, like here's what our values are. Do you think that yours match? Values like things like player experience first. And what was striking was one of the things, I can't remember. I think that like ask the D-noob class, who do you think Riot makes games for? And like everybody. And they said, no, like we're called Riot Games because we want to riot against that. Like we intend to make games that hyper serve an audience. And whether that audience is everybody or it's small, like when we make a game, we want to hyper serve the people who are playing that game. And so like their calculated risk is like, is that audience something that, you know, I don't know. I can't talk about how they de-risk things because I don't know, but that really struck me that like, we're not looking to make every game with mass appeal. If you don't like tac shooters, you're not going to play Valorant. They're not going to compromise the tac shooter portion of Valorant so that the MMO player will play it, you know? And that's what I really respected, and that's what I could get behind.
Yeah, just like they wouldn't compromise the MOBA aspects of League, and they wouldn't aspect the auto chest aspects of TFT. Yeah.
Yeah, they just made
very narrow markets.
Made a different game, like in the same launcher, but they're like, you know what, we're not going to make this part of League. We're going to make a different game out of it. So I really respected that.
Yeah, that's another challenge, right, of AAA is same challenge that Hollywood has, which is just that every property now, since the project is so the cost for the project is so high, to recoup that, you need to have a global audience, right? And so the game needs to be attractive to Asian audiences, Western, etc. And so trying to thread that needle becomes challenging, and then the game kind of feels muddled because it's trying to be something for everybody, right? Like one really good example, not for a game, but for like say the Marvel universe, is that they try to reduce how much dialogue is actually in the movie, because then they don't have to like localize it, and then all the global audience can just kind of understand like what's going on in the scene without like, they try to make it as less esoteric and less culturally kind of specific as possible. So that just really hog ties you in terms of creativity, and then also just can make the experience just feel like, well, this thing is trying to be for everybody, and then now it's for nobody.
Because that's actually a good point, because like sometimes the edit like cultural flair is kind of what sells a game sometimes as well.
Yeah, exactly. Which is ironic because one of the biggest art styles that's so popular now is the anime art style, right? Like from Genshin or from there's this game Blue Protocol and things like that. So that aesthetic is like super popular, but of course that was a very specific art style from Japan, So it's just interesting how those things overlap.
I have like two more kind of directions I think I sort of want to explore. One is just exploring the idea of a AAA company like, for example, Riot, going pretty wideband with the games that they're developing and being okay with just recouping from fully serving the audiences that all their games are tailored to. I'm wondering like what there seem like there's some obvious drawbacks to that strategy, which is like, if you have just one megalithic title, you can just put all of your marketing muscle, all of your attention behind that. It's very easy to get everybody on board with supporting that game if it's making all your money. If you have 10 different games that are, bringing in the same gross as that one giant game, you need to think about all of your different campaigns. You need to think about staggering all your promotions so that you don't trip over your own feet. You have more competition that you need to be aware of in terms of staging that kind of stuff too. Do you think that like that additional complexity of trying to occupy kind of like too many spaces at once is a real deterrent to AAA trying new things? Because in terms of the raw numbers, I feel like we've all worked at companies where, we will see that there are, if not incubation wings, everywhere I've worked always has a handful of small teams trying new stuff, At PopCap for a period of time, there was this like Pop Labs group. There's always, we have game jams at work. I think game jams are popular everywhere. It's not that these companies, I think, are generally not trying to find new ideas, but I'm wondering if the burden of trying to even support so many things like that at the same time probably chokes off a lot of this stuff before it gets there.
Well, you mentioned something that I'm seeing a lot more around the industry, which is like an example. Supercell is opening a U.S. studio, and if you saw their press release, their studio says like, we're making games you wouldn't expect. And what that says to me is that if they wanted to just make a U.S. office, they even have one, I think, in like San Francisco or something. But if they just wanted to make a U.S. based office that made Supercell games, they could do that. But they were like, no, like we're going to challenge that. We're going to build a brand new studio from scratch. And again, that like touches on the things I was talking about, where now you are creating your own workflows. Now you're creating your own culture, and you're creating your own like how you work and how you set your goals. And it's almost like Supercell is just funding them to basically have a small indie studio just try things. And I think I see that a lot actually with like big game studios like buying or giving their IP or like using other absorbing smaller game studios to make video games under their like publishing branch, right? Like a good example of that is like Riot, I guess. I keep using Riot because it's what I know. But the Airship Syndicate made the Ruined King, or who made Hextech Mayhem? I'm the worst. But they're like, this is a way to utilize, like, this is a different company. They have different workflow. They have different structures. They have different ways of setting milestones and goals, and they have different, like, it's different everything. And so it's conducive to making a different game, But then it's with that safety that the AAA like having the in for publishing and having the deep pockets that AAA tends to have. I think you start seeing that a lot more. Like Blizzard did that with a couple of studios, right? They took in VV, though VV was making their own games, right? They didn't like make any separate games.
Yeah, they're kind of like a service studio, I think.
A service studio, yeah, but some will just like.
But yeah, I mean that's
studio.
another great example. Is just that. Yeah, the Riot thing is called The Forge, right? Where they just kind of work without other third-party studios, give them the IP, and probably give them some strategic support, maybe guidance on technical things or something like that, or marketing. And it's a lot more developer friendly than, say, a traditional publisher. Yeah, I think that's like another option. These are all kind of like innovations in order to try to find new ways to create creative, innovative products or games. Goose, did you have a question or a statement or thoughts?
To kind of touch bases back on like the niche gaming market, or how much an IP can carry could carry forth for like new types of games, right? So again, back to Riot with League of Legends, of course, that's a big game with a huge ass character roster. I think it was Arcane that really opened up the League of Legends roster to everybody. One content creator that I watch is Maximilian Dude, who's a big fighting game person. And of course, with Project L and the Cannon Brothers on it, got him really excited about the game. And then he watched some trailers about it. He's like, you know what? I really got to play out League of Legends. Then he looked at the roster, and it just blew his mind at how big that roster was, and just really excited about that game. And then Candace mentioned Ruin King as well. And then, of course, we got the MMO that we are all excited about. How strong can an IP carry out into new types of games, though? Yeah, the type of people that you bring onto that project.
I think it can be huge. I think it just depends. It depends. I think the League of Legends IP is still very coveted. There's not that many projects that have used the League of Legends IP, right? But then you have situations like Star Wars or Warhammer, where there's like so many games that utilize that IP, and it's not. I don't know if it's gonna be quality just because they have, it's Star Wars, right, or Marvel or Warhammer, and so it just really kind of just depends. But that can be an option, I think.
Yeah, and also kind of a cross pollination, right? Again, like I'm a certain person that likes this type of game, and I really love this universe. Wait, they're making a different type of game with the same people that I like, but not a game genre that I normally play. Kind of do want to check it out because I'm familiar with this person or these characters. I think that is playing well for Riot's favor. And I brought up Capcom earlier with their playing safe in all their Resident Evil DLCs and remakes. I don't know exactly where I was going with this, but I just wanted to bring up like how safe can someone go versus how broad you can go with your safe IP.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I say this a lot, but to me it's as simple as this: making, like, you can make good games with, you need like three things to make good games. You need like one, a good engine, like Unreal or Unity is a good engine, or I guess Frostbite was good for what it did, or like the tool that makes WoW. It has like, it's an engine that makes it. So one, you need a really good tool. Two, you need a really good team, like a team that either knows how to work together, knows how to have conflict resolution. There's your role on a team. Like, I'm a game designer, and what I do is I design the thing, and that's like your title. But you also, like, there's soft roles that people play on games. Like, an example on WoW is like, if you're the person that people really trust to come bounce an idea off of you, and you're kind of like, I like to call that person the muse, like they're the team muse. Like, you can always get inspired by this person, or they're the person that, like, when the room is too tense and everybody is disagreeing on something, they're the arbiter, or they're the ones that are going to like get everyone aligned again. There's those kind of roles that exist on teams that are, you don't hire for those roles, but people tend to like take those roles. And a good team will have a good mix of people who can communicate well, align, resolve conflict, and move towards a goal. So like a really strong team could have a bad engine, but still make a really good game. And then three, the third one is the IP. And so like, if you have all three of those things, if you have like a really strong IP, and the strength behind an IP obviously is like, you don't have to do a lot of heavy lifting with your audience. Like, some people will play the game just because of the IP, or the IP will also give you a lot of, like, you don't have complete carte blanche for the rules of the game, right? Like, you're not going to make spaceships in a Lord of the Rings game. So it gives you like some necessary constraints to get you from putting yourself in the weeds on the video game that you're making. And so, and my thesis here is that you can be missing one of these things and still make a great game, but missing two, it makes it extremely hard. So like, a good IP and a good tool. Yeah, exactly. Or a good team and a good IP, they could use a shit engine and still probably make a pretty good game. And so when you talk about the IP, I think that's just one facet of what can, and not even just like the game is good objectively, but like it actually ships and it didn't, kill people in the making of it. And, it's something that either can be expanded on or is genre defining or something like that. And not to say it's impossible to go in with just one of these things or none of these things. It's just, you're at really bad odds if you don't have all three.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for answering.
Thanks for coming up. There was kind of like one other aspect, I think, to the Bellular video or to this discussion overall, which is that this is a bit of a slow season, right? But Chris, you mentioned we could maybe even talk about why, if any reason, does it seem like these games are maybe taking longer to come out these days? Apart from obviously, they're more complex to develop, but that feels like a thing that should be probably like, moving at pace with, tools development in a perfect world. We've got COVID delays, obviously, like slower communication and such, but I'm just curious if you two think there might be anything else to it, like any anecdata about... Well, I'll just start off. For example, every time I see somebody in our Discord link one of these listings from a Blizzard Twitter account talking about how many roles they're hiring for one of these games, I just feel like that is a fucking impossible number of people to like hire and reintegrate in a timely fashion. If you're trying to keep things on the rails. I just have to imagine that it's not just like, Zoom calls are slow and you can't, read the room and communication is what it is. But like people hopping companies in the middle of all this stuff and having to onboard remotely and switch cultures and get up to speed is probably really kind of impacting a lot of timelines too. All the shuffling.
No, I think for sure that's been incredibly disruptive. I think every gaming company is hiring, for a lot of key roles and they're hurting. And so, yeah, I think that is a real thing. And it's kind of why, Blizzard acquired Proletariat and Vicarious Visions, because it's called an acqui-hire. You just kind of, get all that talent instantly. And then, there's a certain kind of compensation contract with everybody, so you get them for locked in for a period of time. So yeah, that's totally a reason why I think a lot of games are just taking a lot longer, and also just kind of costs. Just a lot of these, I think you're going to see a lot of studios close up a lot of projects, make some hard choices because you gotta concentrate your people to things that double down on what's working and kind of shut down that is an open question, just to concentrate your workforce if you're spread thin. So you're going to see a lot of that too, I think.
Really interesting to think about, actually. Maybe what we're seeing is a byproduct actually of the cost of making games going up like significantly, but the price of games not going up significantly. In as much as like, yeah, people aren't willing to take more risks, or you can't afford to like recreate or remake the wheel, so people are just making more of the same thing over and over again.
The box price of video games not going up, or so slowly going up and being protested, is like, I don't fucking get it, man. I feel like this like shrinkflation bullshit that happens where you just feel like you need to design a game that can just capture people for years at a time with all this endless systems bloat and forcing them to run around because like you could not possibly justify releasing something on the back of only a $60 price tag. I think it really has hurt this type of thing and hurt innovation overall. Like I just said, plenty of single player experiences, sorry, not plenty, but there's always like the one example per year of like a, polished narrative driven single player experience that comes out per year and people are like, see, it's not dead. But there are really only a handful of AAA studios that manage to pull that off. Like it's not all of them. I don't doubt that there's a reason that, live services and monetization have started appearing in everything, I guess is what I'm trying to say. If it were just as simple as like, dude, just make Last of Us 2 or whatever, everybody would be doing it. Not that that was simple, but I guess what I mean is like, do you think that if we paid like $100 for games, do you think that there would be a response from the development world to making games that can be more single-minded, more straightforward conceptually, and not, kind of need all of the upkeep, all of the maintenance, all of the extended attention?
Fuck no, Bobby Kotick would just pocket the money.
Okay, yeah, they just. I
No,
know.
I'm just joking. I'm just joking. What I mean though is like another thing you have to consider is that video games have to compete for talent with big tech. And if you think about like a game that makes a shit ton of money, right? You think about a game that makes like $1 billion a year, or like some of those other games will make like, I don't want to call them out, but so they'll make like $10 billion a year, which is like a lot of money for games, But you're competing with like Amazon and Netflix and Google and Apple that are making $80 to $120 billion a year, and it's like, well, you can't afford to pay like the people that are pulling in like $1 million a year working for like Fang. You're not gonna be able to pay them that kind of wage, and so for video games, right? Because you don't make the money that like Meta or like Apple makes. And so you're like fighting for that talent. So you see a lot of people who like say, fuck it, I'm gonna stop making games and I'm gonna go into big tech or something like that. And then you see it not just as many, but you see a lot of them also eventually say like, actually big tech is not for me. I love making video games. I want to come back. And they take this lofty pay cut, like 50 to 75%, just to get back into games. But that's gonna be really hard too, you know? So anyways, my point is that games would have to be like 10 times more expensive
That's
to
not going to
keep
happen.
up with tech.
Yeah, that's going to have to get masked. I mean, in a lot of that's so wild. And again, we talked about it a handful of times on here, but it's important to remember too that sometimes a lot of that cost ends up getting subsidized by your own tax dollars in whatever province that you're living in. You know, just like happens for various companies too. So they're pulling money in at all ends. Are there any companies out there in the AAA space that seem to have innovation or experimentation as like a core value to you two?
Oh, I don't know. You'd have to be pretty embedded to know that, right?
Supercell has kind of a culture like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's kind of like more of incubation-driven studios where it's just about starting up a project with a tiny team and killing it fast.
Mm-hmm.
And it's based on kind of analytics and data and kind of play testing the game early, just in the very white box, even if it's just even, paper kind of phase to find stuff quick. I think Supercell does kind of have that culture, and it was kind of like all the rage at the time. I think so many studios tried to emulate that sort of thing. But it's hard to say whether just that model is indicative of Supercell's success versus, just some of the just great games they had or the talent there. It's just hard to like pin it down to like, oh, it's just this development formula and that's it, right? Like but that is one that I think encapsulates that idea to some extent.
Supercell.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I was going to say Valve for a bit, but then I realized like they're not frequently making games anymore. And when I was thinking of the innovation, it was more all of the stuff that's
technological.
External. Yeah,
they're like an engineering-based company. Like it's all about...
The innovation was all around payments and platforms and out-of-game experiences and, interconnectedness. And but certainly they were
it's about
doing
pushing the boundaries of what a game is, I think, in a lot of ways, for Valve. I think that's why they're kind of getting in VR, and that's why they're having the Steam Deck. And Dota was like one of the earlier, free to play, everything's free basically sort of things, and it was purely cosmetics.
I remember for a period of time, especially I think when they were really pushing heavily on VR and the Steam machines back in the day and the controller and attempt after attempt. Now they got the Steam Deck that's like making the best use of all that stuff. But like it really felt like they were the company that was taking the fact that they were free from shareholder pressure and had all of this money coming in to take the bets that nobody else really could. It felt like they were kind of taking one for the rest of the industry and being like, we're wading into VR. Obviously, they would eventually expect it to kind of turn a profit, but they were trying new stuff. In a space where, like, I think they realized, only they could. I'm trying to think of others. I'm getting pinged. Is that one of you two tell me we should end the show? Yeah, 100% probably is. Wrap up. Okay, it's getting hot. I'm getting faint, and I think we're running out of stuff to talk about, so let's do this again in 2 weeks. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Thanks for another very lively live chatting session. Leave some topics, leave some questions, keep chatting, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Chris?
All right. Later, gamers.
Later, buds.